Welcome to Hope on Fire, relevant talk radio for young adults. Whether you're 25 or 45, there's bound to be a discussion that you care about. Our mission is to share practical ways to find God in your everyday life. Our host today is Sabine Vatel.
Perhaps you felt like Cameron Courtney, columnist for Christian Single Today. She said that Sunday was becoming the loneliest part of her week. Well, the most well-adjusted single will feel out of place in the church. In fact, is there a place for singles in the Christian church today when being married seems to be the norm? People may not come right out and say it, but the underlying message that the unmarried young adult often receives is, "Why aren't you married yet?" And that is our theme for our program today. I'm Sabine Vatel, your host for today. Thank you and welcome to Hope on Fire. I have with me my co-host, Chris Lang, and we're also graced by the presence of a very diverse, gifted, and accomplished group of individuals who also happen to be unmarried. And I'm really excited to be introducing this.
Except for one.
Well, we're going to get to that.
Okay.
I'm excited to be introducing this rather. I'm going to explain, I guess. But indeed, you're right, Chris, except for one. But let me quickly introduce you so we can get into our conversation today. I'm so glad you guys are here. You look so good. And as Chris, you're welcome. As Chris has mentioned, Gregg Cain, no stranger to Hope on Fire. He's a pastoral counselor, a college professor, a very wise man, and he's a Hope on Fire's contributing editor for Mission and Witnessing. I saw that puzzled look on your face, Gregg. And Gregg is indeed the only married a member of our panel, and we'll kind of say why it is that he's in this group. What you doing here? So how did he get in here?
$5,000.
And next to him is the beautiful Saska Sookra. And Saska is a family practice physician. She's from Canada. And I love Canada. And she's a speaker and inspiration for teens and young women seeking spiritual growth. And I know Saska as a spiritual warrior, as a prayer warrior. And I'm so glad you're here, Saska, on this panel. And I've mentioned already my co-host, Chris Lang. He's in the middle there of all of us. And Chris, I'm glad you're here to help me with this program.
Great to be here.
Yeah, and then next to him, we have a very special guest, also first on our show, is Shari Gamewell. And I'm thrilled to have her here. She's a licensed clinical social worker, and her emphasis is guiding individuals towards healthy thinking. And you have 26 years of experience derived from various disciplines, medical and counseling fields. Yeah. And she also happens to be a single. I know you're going to bring a lot of insights into this program today. Yeah. That kind of to contextualize our conversation today, one of the books that I've come to really like is called Real Sex by Lauren Winner. It's not just about that topic, but it's about singleness and what it means in America in particular. And she says that because of the trend of singles in America, executive and marketing gurus have kind of tailored products like food and drinks, detergent even, to kind of fit this growing segment of the population. And we have more singles than we've ever had in previous generation. So you see where I'm going, right? We have the secular world sort of adjusting, and it kind of behooves the church to make some adjustments, or the singles to find new ways to become engaged into the church setting. And so let's, and Greg, I have you here because you're kind of the full circle man, you know? And
Yes, I am.
You are, and
Mr. Demographic.
That's right, and he is, because he's been married and divorced, was single for a while, now he's married again. And not only that, but you bring in really good insights on the topic. So I just want to ask you how you see the integration of singles and in the church life, kind of your commentary on that.
I think that singles have a unique challenge in church settings because there's always been this quest to kind of understand where singles fit in.
Yeah.
And as you look at kind of the history of singles and church ministries, you begin to understand something very important. And that is most programming for churches, especially from the 1950s on, was geared more for families. And if you weren't married, there's something wrong with you, so we need to have a singles ministry program so that's really, and cloak, if you will, a sanctified dating service through a church so that hopefully you'll get married to fix you so that you can become the norm.
Right.
And that's been a challenge. And, of course, George Barna, research specialist, indicated that by the 21st century, there will be more singles in churches than families, than what we traditionally define as the nuclear family. And that's happening.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah, and that's why the topic is particularly relevant to us today. So the family is obviously the core of the church. And you guys, I'm sure, have been in this situation where it's, for singles, it's difficult to be, or awkward to be in a church setting. A lot of singles sort of go the other way. I remember but doing the church hopping thing for a period in my life. And you guys can relate to that because you sort of don't quite fit in that environment.
Well, I think it's a state of mind, Sabine, a perspective that a single might have. I mean, in my case, I'm divorced. When I was married, all of my friends were married couples. It's interesting how that dynamic happens. When you're single, a lot of your friends you hang out with are single, and somehow magically your circle changes when you get married. And then when you're divorced, suddenly you're trying to readjust.
Right.
And that was a big challenge for me in that process of readjusting to church life. And I think that singles who find out where they fit in church with their vocation, with their skills, with their talents in those areas that God's gifted them in, if the church recognizes the singles, then they have a chance to feel like they fit in. Otherwise, they feel like they're on the outside, I think.
Isn't that based also on the stereotypes of singles? I mean, what kind of stereotypes? Aren't we stereotyped as a segment of the church population? I think Gregg kind of touched on it, on they need to be fixed up. But can you, Shari, relate to that as a unmarried person? Have you been stereotyped?
I think that it's very common for it to be stereotypical. And I think that even in that, I think there's a lot of people that are single that will stay away from the singles groups. That they'll even stay away because most of the time people are going there and they are looking for somebody.
Right.
And the focus is not as Christ-centered for him to be our main focus. So the focus becomes on being married and that fulfillment instead of the fulfillment of Christ first. And being taught what that means and not being cliche-ish and dogmatic.
Right, sure. Because I think people will, when I think of singles group, and oftentimes it's the elephant in the room, and you kind of said something about the history of it. But people will think single as a kind of recovery group or some sort. They don't want to be associated with the singles group. But that's what we are. That's who we are. We are single people. How do you even surmount that? So how do you find your meaning, your what does it mean to be single? How do you respond to people who are saying, it's not good for man to be alone? Go get married or something. Saska, how do you handle that?
I think, it comes back to Ecclesiastes where it says that there's a time and a season for everything. And for people to rush into getting married for the sake of just being part of a group, you do yourself a big disservice. And I don't think, God has this season ordained for you for whatever reason that you're in this position that you're single to be used by him. And ultimately, a lot of times single people, they forget that. They get so absorbed with when I get married, what I'm going to do. And the time is now that God wants you to use. So I think that's something that people get so caught up in as a single person in the church. They see everybody around them being married and they feel that sometimes, but it's important to realize there are more people out there that are single than they realize.
Not only that, but when we were preparing for this program, I recall, Saska, you mentioned that actually singles don't recognize oftentimes that they have a time advantage for God, for ministry, for the church in ways that people who are in marriage settings or that life cycle stage aren't going to have that ability to serve God in that way.
Right. I think it really is, as a single person, this really is your time to recharge your spiritual batteries, because when you have the responsibilities of a family and a home and a husband or a wife, it's not going to be the same. It's a different season in your life where you have other things where you're ministering to those people in your life. But here's the time where God can use you to minister to people outside your circle. And so...
and I think the challenge of being single, I think is the idea of, again, going to church alone when everybody's sort of coupled. And, it is great to be able to find your gift in church. I think that has definitely been very it's been good for me anyway to be very active and kind of blend in that way. But for the person who's kind of still kind of searching
On the periphery.
on the periphery and kind of feeling left out, I don't know what kind of guidance you would have for them.
I think, for people who are watching this program, if you're not a single person, if you're a family member, if you're married, it's so important for the church members to reach out to those people who are single, to get them, to draw them in. Because that's what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be a community of believers and fellowship. And so if you embrace those people who are single, they start to become part of that fellowship, and they start to feel their purpose. They start to know that.
Yeah.
And that I think is important for the single person, just for people who aren't single, but as well for the people who are. I think it's important to just get in there and get involved.
Not just sit
know?
in the Bible. And when we say the community to pull them in, we're not saying, I have somebody I'd like for you to meet. You talk about something beyond doing that, I think, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, recognizing their personhood in a sense. Yeah. And Shari, you see people in your practice, I would imagine, a lot of people who are single. What is kind of the main challenges you kind of see them having to deal with?
I think if we boil it down to, it's loneliness.
Loneliness.
And the focus becomes, if I am with a group of people or if I'm with someone, then that lonely feeling inside of that person, they believe is going to go away. But it's not so, because you can be in a group of people, and though you're not alone, you're lonely. Because alone is a state, is a physical state, which, we as believers, we're not ever alone. The word tells us we're not ever alone. But lonely is an emotional state. And usually what I explain to people is that loneliness is a call to God. And to
Loneliness is a call to God.
Loneliness is a call to God. It's that place where people say is our God spot, or that vacuum spot, where it is that place that only God can fill, regardless if you're married, single, or what state you're in.
Right.
And
That's a good point, because I think too often singles look at married couples and they think to themselves, if only, then I would have that hole filled.
Yep.
But we know too many married couples who know they're lonely within the marriage setting, and that's maybe the worst kind of loneliness known to man.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you're so disillusioned by that reality.
Right.
Being single while being married.
Single very much. I'd rather be.
Right.
Yeah. But in the Bible says, again, I've been quoted that it's not good for man to be alone, and it's oftentimes equated to hurry up and get married. Because,
Well, it is.
Isn't it?
It's a false theology that the Christian
That's
church
right.
has created. Genesis 1 and 2, Adam was alone, God creates Eve, and so Eve removes Adam's aloneness, and Adam removes Eve's aloneness, and that's the answer. And all the while, we've forgotten that God has created different levels of relationships to be a part of his plan in removing aloneness.
That's right.
The primary issue is removing aloneness. Some people choose not to get married. That's okay.
Wow, that's a revelation. Listen, we're going to come back to our conversation and talk some more about the issue of singleness in the church. Please come back. Well, welcome back, listeners, to Hope on Fire. And our show today is Why Aren't You Married Yet? And we just left off talking about this idea of the twisted view of how everybody should be married. That's what God meant, Gregg. You were saying it's not good for man to be alone. And really, what it says is essentially that we're just created for community. And and I know in college it's not so evident. In college, you have a community of people, activity. It's the postgraduate situation where you don't have a ready-made community around you necessarily, that you kind of feel the pressure. So it kind of speaks to the fact that we need a community around us. And the church is supposed to be that kind of place where the singles find community. Now, the temptation of singleness, the many temptation and challenges in particular that the singles face. Any of you want to tackle one? There's so many. It leaves us speechless, people. Don't be shy, panel.
Well, before the break, one of the things that came out with Shari's comments was this idea that we're going to find fulfillment if we get that ultimate
Right.
perspective of somehow marriage being the completion of our lives, when in reality God is the only one. In fact, the scriptures teach us throughout that God wants us to believe that He's our inheritance.
Indeed.
And that's life-changing. And the challenge in my mind at this stage of my life is accepting that and believing that is God really the ultimate inheritance, and nothing else really matters in the end. It sounds cliche. It sounds simplistic, simpleton.
Right.
And maybe we are simpletons in a faith-based kind of way,
Yeah.
because ultimately that's what rolls off your back, and then you don't have the stress anymore about whether or not I ultimately
true.
get there.
Is that true, Shari?
It's very true, and I think that's important. Is when I tell you embrace your singleness. When we can learn to embrace the state that we're in, we can move forward. And I believe this is about focus. What are we putting our focus on? And our focus is to be God first. And when we start learning how to do that, if not, even the desire to be married or looking for that person can be an idol in our life.
And you know, Shari, that's the thing. And what does that look like? And I don't know. Maybe I'll speak for myself. I don't really see many examples, a live example of people living the single life in a godly way, in a happy way. Most singles are on their way to want to be married and not enjoying the state that they're in. And that's why it's so important to have this program.
I enjoy my singlehood.
Amen. And that's why it's important to have some people who can speak to that.
I mean, I enjoy it. I can't say that I didn't go through those lonely times and I didn't struggle with that, but it took that concentrated, that's it. It's God or not. He is who He says He is, and He's my fulfillment and my sustainment, or He's not. And what does that look like? Well, let me look at the Bible and see what they did. They plugged in. And we could look at examples throughout the Bible. I mean, we look at Jeremiah. He was the weeping prophet. He was lonely and in agony, but then he was in hope. And so we have David throughout the Psalms. We have people that are in there, and their cry is for God.
Amen.
Their cry is for God. Yeah.
And I think with the age of the internet, we have this Christian based orientation with Christian dating sites now that are supposed to be sanctified places. You could, as Gregg stated it early in the program, that you can meet people, and it must be part of God's will to network in those places. And it becomes a frustrating endeavor for many people. You talk around, and most people don't find much fulfillment there because they start to think maybe it's God's will that I meet someone out here, and the world has never been so connected.
That's
and yet we don't know each other.
No.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Saska.
I think one of the other issues facing people who are single is the whole, especially as a Christian, since we're on a Christian show, is the whole issue of sexual integrity and purity. It's such a difficult battle for you as a Christian person, women or men, to maintain that, because daily, minute by minute, you're bombarded with messages, with the fact that, it's okay to live together in this society and things like that. And I think a lot of women that I meet and young people, that's one of my ministries, is to help empower them to realize that you don't have to go there, you know, and that I think is one of the biggest challenges for Christians, because you want to live the life, you want to live in victory, and I think, the devil has his methods, but thank God, he's greater than that. But I think that's a big challenge.
Okay, amen. And since you were speaking, Saska, I had addressed an example of that, actually, of the living the single life. I think in one of the a woman or a speaker that you had witnessed, actually, that kind of was an inspiration to you. If you want to share that a little bit with us.
Well, a few years ago, I went to a conference for women, a very empowering conference, and there was a woman there, and she was talking to all the single women, and a very dynamic speaker. She was about 50 and lived a very full life and was in ministry, and we were all inspired by her. And her testimony was that she was still, at the age of 50, living this life for God, waiting for God to send her the one. And we were just, all the women, they were like, wow, that's just awesome. But in my mind, I was like, Lord, just don't let that be me. I don't want to be there at 50. So it's one of those thoughts that goes through your head. You know that God has plans for you, but you pray that His timing will be, sooner than, I think that's one of the challenges, our timing. We are always waiting, Lord, let it be sooner than what we want.
Right, and as you shared that story, I remember, even before you shared that last punchline of wondering, oh, Lord, don't let it not be me. And like Shari, I've enjoyed my singleness. I think it's been a time of discovery for me and
Yeah.
great opportunities, and I don't regret it at all. But I don't think further. I think like at 50 or 60. I don't. And suddenly I kind of pondered that when you said that story, and the fear of the unknown, I think, is what kind of gets us. What is that going to look like later on? But again, we're called to live in the present and in trust as well too. And I think that the Bible is awesome. It talks about singleness in terms, I think Chris touched on it, in terms that we're going to have supernatural blessings. In Isaiah, it talks about that you're going to have greater blessings in sons and daughters. So the Bible even recognizes the state of singleness as an opportunity. I'd like to talk a little bit about that, what it means to be the opportunities of singleness. The temptation oftentimes is to just kind of settle down and wait on certain experiences.
I know.
Does that resonate with you?
When I went through my divorce, you're left with a sense of emptiness, a hole. I have kids, and that dynamic weighed heavily on me. And so after that, I ended up leaving the church for a while, because not so much that I was upset with God, it's just that I was in family ministry and now my family's gone. So to go to church for me was very painful because of what it represented.
Right.
For the first time in my life, I was faced with this issue. Are you comfortable with just you and God?
That's right.
And I became comfortable over the next 6 years. I was divorced for 6 years, and I became comfortable with, okay, God, if this is what you have in mind for me, I'm okay with that.
Yes.
And so singleness to me, whether you're married, you're single, whatever the case is, God says he will supply our needs. He doesn't say that only to married people and say to single, I'll supply your need by supplying a spouse for you, and in supplying
That's
a
right.
spouse, I'll meet your need.
Yeah.
He's
right.
meeting our need whether we're single. So singleness is not, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not bad. It's a good thing. It's where I truly found my reliance upon God.
You
That's
said,
awesome.
yeah, you said
Thank you,
something
Gregg.
about a 6-year journey of finally coming to the point where you said to God, okay, if this is what you want for me,
That's right.
I'm okay with
Yeah,
that.
because I
That sometimes
surrender
takes,
almost.
Well, it is. It's a relinquishment.
surrender,
It's a prayer of
actually. Yes.
relinquishment where you're
It is.
finally willing to let go of this need for something else.
Well, I had been culturally conditioned and theologically conditioned
Yeah.
that marriage was the thing. And
Oh, that I appreciate that testimony. And I think when you say theologically, we often talk. Well, I don't know often, but I've heard about the gift of singleness. And one of the teaching that was really liberating for me is to see singleness as actually a gift, just as marriage is a gift. You have singles, right, Shari, walking around saying, "Do I have the gift of singleness?" Like, hello, you're single, you got the gift, right? So, but I appreciate what Gregg said about the relinquishment.
Yeah.
Does that resonate
Yeah.
with you? Yeah, the relinquishment,
Yeah.
the idol talk, and the idea of marriage as an idol. If you want to address that a little bit, Shari, I like the way you do that.
Well, it's whatever we're giving more concentrated effort to or a thought process than God. And so people think of idols, and depending on what they've been taught about them, but our thoughts can become idols. Our desires can become idols because we're focusing on that more than we are God. And so that becomes a high place in our life, and he wants to tear that down. And what I do with people is that during this time, discovery, right, is when they're in there, I go, you know what? God knows so much that he knows if he puts someone in your life right now, you're not ready for it.
Well,
So what does he want to work on in your life, and what does he want to heal and bring to your awareness and walk you through that? And go through that. And for people that haven't been in those previous relationships that haven't worked, let's break them down and let's find the patterns.
yeah, thank you for that, Shari. We ask it, why aren't you married yet? And again, we've done a show similar to this before, and I find myself, is it a question we should ask ourselves? Like, why am I not married yet? People, we may sense the pressure from the outside, but is there some sort of self-examination that perhaps could happen, or needs to happen? Is this something that I'm pushing away in my life? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think a lot of times when we ask questions, there's an underlying assumption. Are you married yet? Well, there's something wrong. Okay, are you going to stay single for the rest of your life? What about people who have remained single their entire life? It's been a choice. and they're totally comfortable with that. And it's not been in reaction to something that's happened or not happened. It's just that through their life, they have been comfortable with a sense of singleness.
And that doesn't mean to say they haven't examined their lives from time to time to take stock.
It's a conscious choice, yes.
No. And there is a conscious choice for many people who decide to remain single. And that is okay. I mean, my word, can you imagine someone who's made that decision to stay single and they become comfortable with all those issues and been able to navigate them and process them, and they're okay? Wow.
Yeah. We can't let that happen. Shari.
Well, that's Paul, I believe, is the one who said, you know, it's better if you're unmarried or if you're single.
That's right.
To be that way. It's
right.
like he was.
Yeah.
That's right.
You know, I think what's hard is these are good things to say. I have people sit there and they go, yeah, but you don't know what it's like to be in my place, lonely, coming home every night. You know, these are good words. And so it's learning how to be there with them.
And actually experiencing that, And hopefully, you know, the example of us being here and talking openly will encourage somebody who's listening to us. And we thank you so much for joining us today at Hope on Fire.
Hope on Fire is produced by Livestreams Media, a listener-supported ministry. To download a free copy of today's program or be a part of our social network, please visit our website at hopeonfire.org. You may also contact us by writing to Livestreams Media, P.O. Box 608513, Orlando, Florida 32860. Once again, that's Livestreams Media, P.O. Box 608513, Orlando, Florida 32860, or online at hopeonfire.org. Thank you so much for your letters and continued support. Until next time, may God set your hope on fire.